Father, I'd like to go back to the Shelley situation, and at some point, it's correct to say that you did advocate his return to ministry unrestricted. Is that a fair statement?
I certainly advocated his return to ministry. I don't recall about restrictions or not at this point.
Is it correct to say that Jennifer Hasselberger advocated strongly against it?
By the time Jennifer was employed by the Archdiocese in the position of chancellor, I was no longer at those senior conversations or tables.
Okay. When it comes to the pornography and whether or not it was borderline child pornography or child pornography, did you characterize what you viewed on Shelley's computer to have been actually not child pornography because they were pop-up ads and thus the kinds of things that one would not intentionally search?
I did use the term pop-up ads, and that was purely guesswork on my part. There were images that were non-sexual images on the materials that Jennifer showed to me. And so my speculation, purely speculation, was that those might have been pop-up ads.
Did you also advocate and take the position that 60% of the child pornography sites on the web are set up by the FBI, and because Shelley had not been arrested by them, he must not have accessed child pornography?
I don't recall that, but I have had that thought. I certainly have had the thought that from a training that I underwent in the early 2000s, FBI and law enforcement people said that this is what they were doing.
Well, that thought has been attributed to you,
yes,
as one having been expressed, that because he wasn't caught, he must not be guilty. Is that your belief?
My belief is that were he actually actively engaged with such websites, there's a high likelihood he would have been caught. That's my belief.
And was it thus your reasoning that because he wasn't, he didn't pose a danger of viewing child pornography or thus engaging in sexual abuse?
Once again, from the beginning, I had no reason to think that he had downloaded or accessed child pornography.
What experience do you have or training in determining whether images are sexual or not, and the ages of the individuals involved?
None. Presumably the same as Jennifer Hasselberger.
Actually, that's for the police, isn't it, to really discern?
Right. Which is where she should have taken the complaint if she hadn't, and eventually she did, is understanding.
So, by your comment, are you faulting Jennifer Hasselberger here?
No. Jennifer and I had the same standing to make a guess as to the status of child pornography. I was relying on the experts who had already reviewed the material, who told us there was no child pornography. So Jennifer's assertion, which ran contrary to that of the experts, was the one that I was called in to write a comment on.
Well, you're not telling us that you actually reviewed the experts' findings, are you?
That's correct.
So how can you say what the experts said, and that there's a contrary view if you haven't read what the experts found.
As I've indicated, I either read it or was given a summary by Bill Phelan. So I'm not sure if I read it or if I received the summary.
Do you have any knowledge that in May of 2012 she showed the images to Archbishop Neinstadt or Laird?
Jennifer showed the Shelley images?
Yes.
I don't. That actually surprises me as I think of it. I don't think I've ever heard that.
Just asking
Alleged.
about your awareness.
Right.
Are you aware that Hesselberger was urging Archbishop Neinstadt to not make the same mistake that she believed you had made in not reporting Waymeyer when it comes to Shelley?
Someone's told me that, yes.
Do you know who?
I don't. Did that appear in a media report?
It appears in documents.
Okay.
That you were, quote, proven to be tragically wrong. I trust you haven't seen that.
Correct.
What involvement, to your knowledge, did the Chancellor Keppers and his predecessor, Andy Eisenzemer, have in the matters pertaining to Shelley here, from your perspective?
I don't believe Andy Eisenzemer was with us at the Archdiocese at the time of the initial concern. So during all time relevant, I don't think Andy was involved. I don't recall when the transition from Andy Eisenzemer to Joseph Kippers happened and where that overlaps with the timelines that we've been talking about here. So it may be that Andy Eisenzemer was involved in the late stages of this, or that Joe Kippers was already employed at that point.
After, you're aware the police went to retrieve some of these materials, and after the police became involved in Shelley, did Joe Kippers or Andy Eisenzemer or any other official of the Archdiocese call you about what was unfolding?
Joe Kippers called me once, and I returned his call, and he asked, "Do you know anything about a hard drive?"
And what did you tell him?
I told him that I recalled that there was a hard drive, but I had no idea what had happened to it. Presumed I had turned it over to the Archdiocese archives.
And did he tell you why he was calling you to ask?
I don't recall that.
And any other conversations with any other officials besides that which you just recounted?
I believe not. I'm almost certain not.
I'd like to ask you, Father, about another priest of the Archdiocese, Michael Stevens. He was ordained in the same class as you in 1980, so you know him.
I do, yes.
And
You want more water? Need more water?
I'm good, thank you.
are you aware of how long Michael Stevens was continued in parish ministry?
I believe he had already been pulled out of parish ministry when I returned from Rome, but I'm uncertain about that. And that was in 1987.
In any case, are you aware that in 1985, Stevens pled guilty to child sexual abuse?
I wasn't aware that was the exact year, but I was aware it was while I was out of the country.
Did you learn that he was put on probation for that crime?
I probably did at some point. I don't recall what knowledge I had and when.
Did you become aware that the conviction became expunged? That means erased from the public record?
I don't know that I ever knew that.
At least you were aware that he worked in ministry unrestricted after the conviction.
That he worked in ministry unrestricted?
Let me rephrase that. You were aware that he did work in ministry for the Archdiocese.
Yes.
And he worked at the Archdiocese offices as a computer technician?
Yes, that's correct.
And as far as anybody outside of the Archdiocese inner circle, there was nobody in the public that was informed of his status as a convicted, as having been convicted of child molestation.
My own belief is that would not be true, that there had been at least some publicity at the time of his arrest and conviction.
How much?
I don't know that.
Are you aware of anything beyond one article in the newspaper?
I'm not.
Okay. Were you aware that after that conviction and while he worked at the Archdiocese offices and continued at least as a priest, that staff at the Chancery were not informed that he was a sex offender?
I'm not aware of that. I'd be surprised that that's so. At least some, it may be that some staff were not hired later, but I believe his situation was fairly widely known when he joined the computer team.
Who made them who made that known to them?
I believe that goes back to Father O'Connell.
And to whom was that made known?
I don't know that.
We have reports that some staff had their children there with him, not knowing this. Do you know anything about that?
I do not.
Did you see him there with kids?
No.
Everybody referred to him as Father Mike, did they not?
Yes.
In 2002, he was voluntarily withdrawn from ministry. Did you have anything to do with the circumstances of that?
Yes.
Was that as a part of the charter?
Yes.
He was not laicized, nor has he ever been petitioned to be removed from the clerical state, correct?
I believe that to be correct.
He was placed on monitoring.
Correct.
And that's called the PALMS program?
Yes.
And you're in charge of that?
I was the supervisor of the persons who carried it out.
And you became aware that he had his own computer consulting business that included 4 or 5 parishes as clients?
I can't swear to the particular number, but I was aware that he was consulting for some parishes, yes.
And those parishes were not made aware of his history of molestation, correct?
I believe that's not true.
You believe they were informed?
I believe they were, yes.
who do you believe informed them?
Well, I believe that there was some perduring information from his history, and that information particularly continued among the priests. I don't recall how much information was distributed immediately in 2002 with his stepping back from any priesthood. And subsequently, at least at one point, I recall my checking with the monitor to make sure that there were people in each place that knew he should not be working in school buildings when kids were around.
Did you expect that the monitor could prevent him from being in parishes with kids around when the monitor would only meet with them quarterly?
No, that's why, as I said, I expected that he would make certain that someone on the work site understood his history. Stephen's history.
You assume that. You don't know that to be the case, do you?
I don't recall it at this point, yeah.
If folks were not informed that Father Mike had a conviction for child molestation, do you think that that is consistent with the promise and the pledge of zero tolerance and the pledge made to the people to keep their kids safe?
I do. I think our Archdiocese was more forthcoming than most through the whole relevant period we're talking about here, about disclosing clergy misconduct to our people.
In 2011, are you aware that Jennifer Hesselberger raised concerns that he remains a priest of the Archdiocese, and anything he does, he's doing as a priest. And if he wasn't a member of the clergy, he'd be prohibited from the employment at the Archdiocese, much less continuation as a priest. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of her specific objections to him.
Well, with that conviction, do you think he'd qualify to be even employed by the Archdiocese?
Perhaps in a computer job, I don't know that.
And the parishes that he's working at have schools, don't they?
At least some of them did, yes.
According to some of the records, there are well, let me ask you this. Did you ever advocate to the Archbishop or any of the officials the names of those priests credibly accused of child abuse be made public?
Yes.
When did you advocate that?
In individual cases throughout the years.
And in any of those cases, were those names ever made public?
Yes. With I did meetings in parishes, perhaps dozens of meetings in parishes starting in the late 1980s to do exactly that.
What names?
Rudolf Henrich was one, Jerome Kern, another, Dennis Campa, another, Timothy McCarthy, another. Those are ones that come to top of mind.
As it pertains to Stevens, as of 2013, were you aware he was still working as a IT consultant, being called Father Mike until November of that year? And were you aware of that?
I'd be surprised that he was being called Father Mike anytime after 2002.
And did you become aware that he was moved out of that position by the Archdiocese because of imminent public pressure and disclosure by MPR and or our office?
I was not. And what position was that he was removed from?
IT consultant at the parishes?
At the parish, interesting. No, I was not aware of that.
In October of 2013, were you aware that Bishop Pichet talked to Stevens about receiving a salary from the Archdiocese?
No.
Are you aware or have any information that as of last fall he was?
That would surprise me, if that's so.
In 2002, were you aware of discussions about offering a severance package to him and placing him on a medical disability for pedophilia?
In 2002, we talked about transitional assistance. I recall that. I don't recall details beyond that.
There's a practice in the Archdiocese that certain priests who are pedophiles are being offered and placed on disability with a diagnosis of pedophilia, correct?
I don't recall that specifically. It would not surprise me if one or even two had something like that.
Gustafson would be one of those.
I'll take your word for that.
Did you have something to do with us setting up the program where they'd be taken off the Archdiocese payroll, placed into an insurance plan self-administered by the Archdiocese, given a diagnosis of pedophilia, and then given payments for the diagnosis of pedophilia?
I did recommend to the Archbishop and the plan administrators that these men were disabled and ought to be treated as disabled.
So did you recommend that plan?
Actually, it was already part of the plan. And I believe in regard to Gustafson, I don't know, perhaps Stevens, I don't recall that they were eligible, already covered by the plan, they were eligible for disability relief.
The records regarding Stevens show that up until October of 2013, he's receiving a salary plus $600 a month in a housing allowance. How does that comport with what your understanding of the plan was concerning pedophiles who are priests?
That would not be consistent from my point of view with the transitional assistance that these persons were offered.
Do you know if he was coded as an employee of the Archdiocese, or?
I don't know that.
Do you have any knowledge of him having received a Christmas card from the Archbishop with a check included in it that he shredded or tore up?
I have no knowledge of that.
I'd like to ask you about Father Levan. Did you become aware, Father, that in 1988 reports were received by the Archdiocese about him abusing two girls?
I believe I did receive that information at some point.
And you're aware that in 1989 one case was settled and in 1992 a second was?
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Or at least I'm not now. I may have been at the time.
Were you aware that he was sent to treatment?
Yes.
Where?
I don't recall.
And there were a number of treatment facilities that were utilized by the Archdiocese for offenders and suspected offenders, including St. Luke's.
Correct.
Was one. Servants of Paraclete is another.
Correct.
Southtown.
I don't know that the Archdiocese ever used Southdown. We may have. I don't recall using it.
St. John Vianney.
Yes, Villa St. John. Isn't it Villa St. John Vianney?
That's
Yeah.
right. Institute of Living.
I don't recall that we used that. I know of its existence.
Any other facilities used for those suspected of or having committed sexual abuse of children?
Well, again, I don't know if all of those facilities were used for sexual abuse of children. You're talking about treatment of priests with various behavioral and psychological difficulties, which doesn't exclude that group.
Right.
I know that that some priests with behavioral psychological difficulties participated in the program in human sexuality at the University of Minnesota as well.
And at least as it pertains to the sexual abuse issue, in all instances where they were sent to treatment, it was always understood that the Archdiocese would pay for it, for both the assessment and the follow-up.
That's correct.
It's always understood that the accused offender being sent to treatment was giving permission for the Archdiocese and the officials to communicate with those that are assessing him and get reports from them.
You're mixing two things together. There's assessment and there's treatment. For assessment, we've discussed this earlier. We would send, in my time in leadership, we would send men for assessment with specific questions in mind and obtain the feedback.
So they always got permission to talk to those that assessed them, whether it was St. Luke's or Servants of Paraclete.
Or the others as well, correct.
Okay. And then they also got permission to get a report concerning findings.
For assessment, that's correct.
And they always got permission both from the priest and with the full agreement of those doing the assessment.
Actually, I think it perhaps was the other way around, that we would send a priest for assessment and ask if the center were willing to provide feedback for specific questions. They in turn would obtain the releases from the man being assessed. I think that's how it worked.
Going back then to Ken Levan, sometime after he is treated, he's returned or assessed, or both. Are you aware that he's returned to St. Joseph's in Lano Lake in ministry in the 1990s?
Had you asked me to reconstruct that memory on my own, I wouldn't have had it, but it does not sound inconsistent. I presume the record shows it. So.
It also showed that he actually retires in 1998, but then is continued on monitoring. Do you have a recollection of him being on monitoring?
Yes.
And do you also recall that...
Could I jump in for a quick
Sure.
second? The formal monitoring program began some years later.
Right.
So.
But there was some informal monitoring that seems to be referred to back
There was.
in that time. Is that under your supervision at that time?
That's correct.
And while he's at St. Olaf, he's doing supply work and on monitoring, and some information surfaces about adult women and misconduct concerning him. Do you recall that?
My recollection is the information about adult women or an adult woman came earlier than that.
Okay. In any case, in 2005, the Archdiocese seems to be going over priests and establishing some kind of monitoring plan. You seem to have involvement with that, correct?
That's correct.
In November 3rd of that year, do you recall writing, quote, "I've dealt with Levan for years about his boundary violations with adult females. I had forgotten there were 2 allegations in the late 1980 regarding sex with 2 teenage girls.
Do we have a document that I could look at?
It's Exhibit 33, but first I guess my question is, do you recall forgetting about that?
I don't remember writing the document we're referring to, so,
Okay.
yeah. Can I look at 33?
Sure. What's that? 33.
Okay.
Okay. At the second paragraph, last sentence, I'll read it. It's to Archbishop Flynn, Pates, Dominica, and Eisenzimmer from you. Dated November 3, 2005.
That's the one I have.
Okay. You state, although I had dealt with Levan for many years about his boundary violations with adult females, I had forgotten that there were 2 allegations in the late 1980s concerning sexual involvement with teenage girls. You wrote that, didn't you?
Looks like I did.
So
I
does
don't
that
recall.
refresh your memory about the fact that you forgot that Levan had abused 2 girls and he was kept in ministry all those years?
Well, as I'm looking at the document, the next paragraph does seem relevant. That
Well, first, does that refresh your memory?
it actually doesn't refresh my memory, but I can see the documents here. So I don't have an independent memory.
So I don't mean to be cute here, but
Yeah.
did you forget that you forgot?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. When was Levan removed from ministry?
I think his final absolute, he retired fully in sometime before this period, but it appears that he was occasionally helping out even past this. So I don't know when he was placed under permanent complete restriction.
Records show in 2011 he's doing supply work. In 2000, January 2nd, and actually until December of 2013, then on January 2nd, 2014, his faculties are removed. Does that sound like?
I was not part of those discussions, so
And on February 17th, 2014, he's on a list that is made public, but a name not publicly disclosed before then. Are you aware of that
no,
being the case?
I wasn't aware of that.